let's do a May wrap up. Hi, I'm Colleen Delaney. If you're new here, I talk about books and writing. Today, we're going to talk about all the books I read in May. As always, in the description, I have all the links you could want. My newsletter, books I've written, all that stuff. I read 7 books in May, and it was kind of an uneven reading month. I shouldn't say uneven, it was just kind of a weird reading month for me. I had like 50% 3-star reads and 50% 4-star reads, which was odd. I'm not like one of those people that like doesn't give books 5 stars. I usually have at least 1 5-star read a month. So that was kind of strange for me. But I did really enjoy some of these books, and some of them I was a little bit more like, about. So let's just get started. The first book I read was an ebook on my Kindle, and it's called Devotion of a Bear by Jennifer Snyder. It was the second book in a series, and I can't remember the series title right now. I had read book 1 a while ago, and I just grabbed it because I was if you watched my April wrap up, I was on like a really big shifter kick at the end of April, and I finished a different series by a different author, and I wanted to read another one, so I grabbed this one. This was a 3-star read, and honestly, I can't remember that much of what it's about. So literally, I just started reading the blurb to try and jog my memory, and I have so little memory of it. It just like kind of flew out of my head when I was done. Jax is the hero. Ren, ? Yes, Ren is the heroine. She moves into town and is like cutting hair, and she has her aunt's cottage, but like I can't really remember anything else about what this book is about. Probably because I literally read this on like May 1st, and right before that I had read I think 4 shifter books in a very short period of time. So for me, I'll trust my review I gave it when I finished, which was 3 stars, which was kind of middle of the road for me. I don't dislike it. I don't love it. That's where we are with it. The rest of the books I remember much better. I apologize for starting with one like that. Next, I read The Summer We Crossed Europe in the Rain, and it's by Kazuo Ishiguro, and they are song lyrics that he wrote for Stacey Kent, who is a jazz musician. And I got this because it's beautiful. It's illustrated, and it's basically like an illustrated poetry book. For me, this was over 4-star read. Just lovely. To spend time with. I read it over a few days, like just sort of read a couple before bed or in the morning, and let myself immerse into the pictures and the gorgeousness of both the writing and the illustrations. It was very nice. Next, I read Grimoire Girl by Hilary Burton Morgan, which I really enjoyed this book. And it's a memoir kind of magic, I think is what she calls it. Creating an inheritance of magic and mischief. And it's basically about her journey into becoming the spiritual person that she is the best way I can say it. She jumps a lot around in her life, her childhood, her teen years, when she was working on different TV shows, when she met her husband, when she had her babies, and how she's always like infused magic in her life, and how the idea of like creating a book she calls it grimoire, that's kind of like the story of your life and your ancestry to give to your children. I actually really like that idea a lot and started making one after I read this. I haven't worked on it in a couple weeks. But I like the idea of that, of putting together a book that has like, this is when your grandparents were born, and this is when your aunts and uncles were born, and this is when I was born, and this is where we lived, and these were our favorite recipes, and these were my favorite places to go in this area. And then I lived in London for a little while, and just like creating sort of this memory to pass down to your kids. And I liked it a lot. I mean, obviously, if you watch my channel, you know I'm pretty witchy. And so I really enjoyed this witchy story. It was very fun. And she's a good writer. Next, I read Middle Tide by Sarah Crouch. This is a crime fiction, not a thriller. And it's about this community in the Pacific Northwest. And you follow it over a lot of years. Like, I can't remember exactly because the first chapter is the 70s, I think. Now I'm going to check. The first chapter is 1973, but present day is 1994. So you go about 20 years and you follow specifically 3 people, I feel like. Elijah and Nikita, who were like high school sweethearts, and then Elijah moved away to San Francisco, and he like broke a promise he had with her. And Nikita kind of moves on. And then Elijah ends up moving back to town, and this woman is found dead on his property. And so then you also follow the investigation through the eyes of the sheriff and one of the other police officers. And I really like crime fiction in that you do follow the law enforcement investigation, unlike in most thrillers, during which you usually follow like an amateur detective who's either working with the law enforcement or without them. I like having the like specific law enforcement as well. Like I was really, really into Law and Order for a long time. And I really like the show Endeavor and Grantchester, where you have police officers working on crimes and seeing kind of how that works when you have the rules of the law and you don't have, like an amateur detective breaking into people's houses. So I thought this was like a solid, good crime fiction read. Next, I read Lilith by Nikki Marmuri. This is a hard book for me to review because if I had read this book when I was like 23 or 24, I would have loved it. As it was, I'm not 23 or 24 anymore. And so for me, it kind of fell flat. It's an interesting retelling. So your narrator / main character is Lilith. So if you're familiar with like Judeo-Christian mythology, Lilith is the first wife of Adam who refuses to submit to him and then kind of becomes like a demon in mythology. So it's her point of view. So you start the book in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Lilith together, and then you sort of follow her. I assumed this was going to be like an ancient world story, like the whole thing was going to be set in ancient times, but you don't. You follow her basically until present day, going through you follow her through some like Old Testament / New Testament events / like early Christianity events, and then to modern day. And I just found it a little bit missing the mark. It was comped with Circe, which I feel like you can't comp things with Circe. I mean, I understand that it's like a mythology retelling of a person over thousands of years, which is technically what Circe is, but I feel like you can't comp Madeline Miller's writing. Also, it was very obvious reading it that the author is not a classicist, or it wouldn't be a classicist, not like like a scholar, like a religious studies scholar when you're reading it. Whereas when you read a book by Madeline Miller, I think it's very apparent that she's a religious studies scholar or a classics scholar / professor. That doesn't mean you can't enjoy books. Like Jennifer Saint, who I adore, is not a classics scholar, and she writes great mythology retellings in my opinion. But this one just felt a little, I don't know. There was some like dialogue that felt off for me. I'm sure there's going to be a crop of 20 to 25-year-olds who are going to read this book and it's going to like change their lives. Because I think that's how I would have felt when I was younger. I would have been like, this is such a cool idea. And maybe if I hadn't read any other mythology retellings, I would feel that way. But for me, it just sort of missed the mark a little bit. I still think it was like a solid read. Like I didn't think it was a bad book, but it just wasn't what I was hoping it would be. I realized when I said this was an off month, it was really just I read 2 books back to back that I was like, that's not what I wanted those to be, because the rest of the books are pretty good. This is the second one. It was The Guest by Emma Cline. So here, this is on me. This is 100% on me. This is like the most lit ficky book. And here's the thing. I don't really think I enjoy lit fic that much. I think that that's just something I need to come to terms with. I much prefer like if it's a contemporary fiction or if it's a thriller. So I always feel like lit fic is kind of like you're reading a book and you're like, is this a thriller? That's kind of how you feel when you're reading, not all, but some lit fic, which is how you felt with this. So basically you're following this woman named Alex, and she's so unlikable. And I know that's purposeful. You're not supposed to like her. She is so unlikable, but it's not that she's just unlikable. It's almost that you don't care what happens to her. She keeps making horrible decisions, and putting herself in bad situations and then making her situation worse and worse and worse. And you never really feel bad for her. And so the premise is that she is, you think maybe a prostitute, definitely a drug addict, and that she's kind of like weaseled her way into a relationship with a very wealthy older man. And he has taken her to, I think they're in the Hamptons, to the Hamptons for the summer. But then they have like, she makes a mistake. And when she makes the mistake, he kind of kicks her out and she decides that she's just going to try to hang out for a while and eventually get back with him. And she does this by like doing like really unethical things and stealing from people and like literally having relationships with children. And I just didn't enjoy my time with it. The prose was good, like it's well written, but I just think it's one of those where I was like, I am not a lit fic reader. and I just have to move on from that fact about me. Lastly, I read A Sweet Sting of Salt by Rose Sutherland, which I really enjoyed a lot, which was nice. After 2 that I was like, those were letdowns. This was not a letdown. So we're following Jean, and Jean is a midwife on Nova Scotia, and she lives pretty much like away from society. She has basically one friend in town who supports her and loves her, even though there's something that has happened in the past that's kind of made the rest of the town shun her. They still use her as a midwife though. And she's in her cabin far away from town one night, and she can like all of a sudden hear this like woman bellowing. Like she can tell she's like in labor, and she runs outside and there's a woman on her property line, like clearly in labor, and she doesn't really know who she is. And then she figures out that there's this fisherman who had gotten married, that no one had met his wife, and it must be her. And she delivers her baby like immediately. And then you follow their relationship over the next couple months, and it's very like magical realism-y, and like great vibes. So you're there for not just one season, but you really get that like Nova Scotia vibe. I think we're in the 1800s. I don't know if it ever says, if we ever get like a specific time, but I think we're in the 1800s. I read an amazing review of this before I read it on Goodreads that's a little spoilery, so I'm gonna say it right now, so just jump ahead 15 seconds. And it was the line, someone just reviewed it by saying, "Don't let your husband get in the way of finding your wife." That was fantastic. I loved that line. So it was really, really enjoyable. So those were the 7 books that I read in May. A little all over the place, but you know, overall, I had some really good reads. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Please in the comments tell me what you read in May, good, bad, in between, whatever, and let me know if there's anything you read that you think I'd really like and I should take a look at, or if you read any of these. I don't think any of them were brand new books. Oh, actually, A Sweet Sting of Salt is pretty new. So that, I mean, not brand new, but so some people might have been reading that. The rest I think are all backlist. If you've made it this far in the video and you want to let me know, but you don't want to write words, please give me a sunshine emoji, because we have been having a very rainy end of May, and I would like to switch that over to the sun for June. And as always, I hope you're in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. I'll see you soon.